This month, the nation will pause to remember Memorial Day, the courageous men and women who gave everything serving our country and defending our freedom. But what does the call to serve look like in 2019? Who are the men and women who are signing up to serve today? I'll be joined by Sergeant First Class Andrew Treiber of the Pennsylvania Army National Guard to discuss those questions and more. All of that is coming up right here, right now. I'm Sam Chen, and this is Face the Issues. Good evening and welcome to Face the Issues. I'm Sam Chen. This month, the nation will pause as we do every year to honor the courageous men and women who gave the ultimate sacrifice serving our nation and defending our freedom. As we pause for Memorial Day, though, we also want to take a look at the men and women who today continue to answer that call to serve. Who are they? And if you're one of those interested, how do you go about serving this great nation that we have? I'm proud tonight to be joined by Sergeant First Class Andrew Treiber of the Pennsylvania Army National Guard. Sergeant Treiber, thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening, Sam. Thank you.
Absolutely. It's great to have you here. First, before we even get started, thank you so much for your service.
Thank you.
And for what you do. And you are a recruitment and retention officer, correct?
That's correct, Sam.
And so your job, could you just, before we even get started, could you explain a little about what you do on a day-to-day basis?
My job on a day-to-day basis is to interact mostly with our community organizations and schools, as we are generally a primary line of assistance for school programs through the National Guard, as well as liaison services for students who may be interested in serving in the Pennsylvania National Guard.
Oh, that's exciting. So you are the one, when someone says, I might be interested in serving in the military, in the National Guard, you're the person that they reach out to.
That's correct.
Oh, that's great. Let me ask you, why do you do it? What gets you up every morning?
Well, you know what, Sam? It's really easy for me. It's family, and that is what I focus on as the beginning of my day. It starts with my family and my children every day. The phone goes away the first couple hours, and then the kids get on the bus to go to school. And then after that relaxing time with them in the morning, it turns to focusing on tasks throughout the day. Mm-hmm. But what keeps me going, what has kept me going for many years in our recruiting and retention battalion, is just the enjoyment of reaching out to people, making connections with people like yourself even, who over time you get to know a little better and you get to contact, and then all of a sudden you get a text message about coming on a TV show on a Friday morning. So that's what keeps me going. It's the connections with people.
That's great. I love that, and I think that's even beyond the military. That's people. The most successful people in life are those who keep the relationships and who build those relationships. And I think certainly the military teaches that. Let me ask you, as we get into some of the specifics about young men and women who are interested in service and interested in the Guard, what is the difference between National Guard and the other branches or sectors of service? So
the National Guard it's a reserve component of the Army, a lot like the Army Reserves. Mm-hmm. The difference is we are state and federally funded, which allows us to partake in a lot of state activities, state active duty for natural disasters and things like that. And on the enlistment end, it allows us to give extra money for college that the federal government can't give. Our state education benefits are a big reason why people enlist into the Pennsylvania National Guard.
Got it. And so when we introduced you, we said the Pennsylvania Army National Guard. So that is both the Pennsylvania side of it and then the Army side of it.
The Pennsylvania Army, just the Pennsylvania Army National Guard. There's also the Pennsylvania Air National Guard.
Oh, okay.
So each of the two branches functions as they sound. We are the Army side of it. The Air Guard is going to be the Air Force side of it.
Got it. Okay. That makes sense. So let me ask you this. In general, across the military, the different branches, specifically in Pennsylvania with the National Guard, from where you sit, what's the state of our military enrollment at this point? What are you seeing?
Right now, we're trending up. so to speak. While our state numbers might be dipping slightly, we are trending up in general. What we're seeing is a lot of people are enlisting for different reasons these days. Years ago, it was a very heavy toward college benefit reason for enlisting. Right now, what we're seeing is a lot of young men and women are enlisting because of service to their country, gaining more experience. Obviously, with the job market fluctuating constantly, I think college graduates are realizing that when they go and sit in interviews, just because they have a degree doesn't all of a sudden make them qualified. So for college grads particularly, gaining that extra edge or putting an extra tool in the toolbox, as I always like to say, is really what I think is starting to drive us in an upward trend.
That was my next question. What were the main reasons that you see people join the military? To that point, do you see this as a positive shift in the mindset over the years?
I think it's a good shift because you have people that want to enlist to A, serve their country, and B, get more experience. And I think that is a problem these days. In recruiting, we do a lot of job fairs and career fairs and things like that. And what we see when we get these resumes is we see a resume, and we don't see a whole lot on that resume other than I went to college and I got a degree. Our guard soldiers who are college graduates go on and submit resumes with not just a college curriculum, but real-world experience or maybe deployment experience, which a lot of employers these days are looking for. They're looking for somebody who gives them that edge, and our soldiers can do that.
That's incredible. I think a lot of times people don't realize that serving is also a job. And it's not just, we kind of almost put the military in its own box. Like you're all the jobs and then there's the military. But you are working in the military and it is a job.
Correct.
We were talking about this before we started rolling the cameras, but military isn't for everyone, right? I mean, I hear recruiters say this all the time. You guys look for a very specific kind of person to recruit. Could you go into that a little bit?
What the Pennsylvania National Guard particularly is looking for these days is going to be somebody that A wants to serve. Gone are the days for us of selling the Army or selling the Army National Guard to somebody. We're not out there to sell, so to speak. We're out there to offer information for people so that the people coming into us are more likely to enlist because they want to do something for themselves and join as something that's greater than themselves. So what we're seeing right now is we're seeing a smaller pool of qualified applicants. It has become increasingly more difficult to enlist in the military in general, and I think a lot of times that has slowed numbers down, that has slowed accessions down, but at the same time we're getting a more qualified applicant when they do enlist. The standards are higher, therefore we get a much more qualified applicant.
That was actually my next question. What is it that the standards have gotten higher in the military, or is it that just applicants are not as qualified as they used to be? Or
I really think it's a combination of both. Standards definitely have changed over time. When I began as a recruiter almost 11 years ago, we were in the midst of two wars in both Iraq and Afghanistan. We needed bodies on the battlefield. Things were different. A lot of rules were lessened. As we pulled ourselves away from both of those conflicts, still there by the way, but pulled ourselves away more from those conflicts, it became increasingly a focal point to create a more qualified applicant. What we were noticing over time is that people were coming to us who were maybe a little more out of shape than normal, who maybe didn't do well in school. So things changed, standards raised, and I think we do have a much more qualified applicant that walks in the door these days.
So along those lines, what are the medical or physical requirements that you're looking for?
Well, you're looking for major issues. So, obviously the one that always comes up is asthma. That's just a disqualifier for the military. Unfortunately, people with some severe heart issues, even if they are athletes, and I know many athletes with heart issues that do just well, are also disqualified. Those are the two big ones. There's a million different disqualifiers out there. Some things are waiverable, some things are not. Just because you've had a surgery or reconstructive surgery on a part of your body doesn't mean you're disqualified. It might mean a particular branch might need to waive you into it.
Okay. And there's a physical regimen to this too, right?
Yes.
All the recruits have to pass a physical level of.
Yes. Our soldiers, when they come in the door, the first thing they have to pass is going to be their height and weight requirement.
Okay.
After that, once they enlist and they're in the door, they have to take an occupational physical assessment test. I always like to term that as like the fifth grade presidential fitness test you took in elementary school, on steroids a little bit. So it's a little blown up. They must pass that to go to basic combat training.
Okay.
And then from there, they get to basic combat training, and then there's physical assessment tests that they take there as well to pass. Yes, it's a requirement twice a year to take a physical assessment test.
Now, if you're a high school student, or I mean, you recruit not just high school students, right? You recruit students out of college, out of community colleges.
College, prior service. People that have served before who are coming back in. College grads, college students, high school students, anybody 17 and up.
Okay. So if you're sitting in high school or maybe in a college classroom, is there something they should be looking at grade-wise, activity-wise, that for you that you would look when they sit down with you would say, oh, your grades were outstanding, your grades weren't so great, or is there specific activities that you would encourage someone to be involved in?
High school students in general, we're looking at juniors and seniors in high school that need to pass the ASVAB test, the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery Test. Those students that are maybe first year or first quarter juniors, they haven't had some of the level of math and even some of the language arts and English that maybe a senior or a freshman in college has had. So we ask them to focus specifically on different things. Maybe they take an algebra or pre-calc class or something like that. College students, on the other hand, you kind of get both sides of it. You get people that are very knowledgeable and can test very well. You also get some people that think they're very knowledgeable and don't test so well. Some that maybe have slipped in.
Okay, fair enough. Let me ask you this, and then before we go to the break, the lot of different routes for young men and women to join the military, and you hear a lot. I remember when I was in high school, we had recruiters visit the high school and so on. There's the service academy versus the ROTC versus enlisting versus OCS. There's doing it right out of high school versus doing it in college, or to your point, even former service members who come back. There's tons of different branches: the Army, the Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard, Marine Corps, obviously the National Guard side of that with here in Army and Air Force.
Right.
Where does someone even begin to look, and how do you figure out who's a good fit where?
Where I start with, and I'll use high school students because they're the ones that I think need the most guidance, so to speak, and parental guidance as well. Where I start is people have to look at, do I want to serve my country? It's almost like a flow chart, Sam. So if that's a yes, then you move on to, okay, I want to serve my country. Am I eligible? If that's a yes, then we move on to what branch am I looking into and why am I looking into that particular branch? Am I looking at the Marine Corps because my uncle and my grandfather served in the Marine Corps? Am I specifically focusing on the Army because my father graduated from West Point or something like that? Am I looking at the Air Force because I'm interested in airplanes and being a mechanic on an airplane? So students in general really, and people in general, really have to narrow down what is the best fit based on what do I want to do? What are my qualifications? And then how does that set me up for success in figuring out a particular branch?
That's great advice. Don't go away. We'll come back. We'll be right back after these brief messages. Welcome back to Face the Issues. Sgt Trevor, thank you again for taking the time to talk to us about service today. Let me start by asking you this. When you joined the service, what made you decide that you wanted to take that route and join the service?
Well, interesting story, Sam, and I'll share it again for you real quick. So I am I'm a business major at a Catholic college in Center Valley in 1996, 97, and a little bit of 98. I failed econ, accounting, and theology in one semester, and I realized at that point in time that I needed to make a little shift, so I moved to the community college. And my dad said, you need to find another way to pay for school. And I found the Army as a way to pay for school. So for me, that is why I joined the Army initially. It's not why I re-enlisted 4 times since, but that's initially why I joined the Army.
And that was my next question. You stayed 20 years. What's kept you enlisting and re-enlisting every time?
Initially, when you throw $15,000 bonus at a 24-year-old or 25-year-old, that's a good chunk of change.
Sure.
When you're just finishing up college and you're getting out into the work world, so that was one of the reasons to enlist initially. That money went to pay off my wife's college education, and it bought me a kayak. But subsequent re-enlistments were fairly simple. Once I contracted with the Army National Guard in 2008, it was more or less, where do I sign, and how do I keep this fantastic job and full-time position in the National Guard going?
That's great. Well, we appreciate what you do, and the fact you're bringing in the next generation of the Army. Yes. And so thank you for doing that. Let me ask you this. We've gone through periods in our history where it was easier to be a service member and periods where it was harder to be a service member. Of course, we think of Vietnam, and the service members, to no fault of their own, were vastly mistreated by society.
Right.
Today in 2019, how difficult is it being a service member? Obviously, the work is always going to be difficult, but in society.
In society, and particularly, you make an interesting point. The Pennsylvania National Guard, our soldiers are out and about in communities constantly, in uniform and out of uniform. Very different from an active duty base, which is kind of closed off, and everyone may know each other, but everyone knows everyone there is in the military. So when we're walking out and about in our communities, it is a little different. But what we see is a lot of respect. We see a lot of signs of gratitude. We don't hear the echoes of the Vietnam War, so to speak.
That's good to hear. That's very good to hear. Obviously, this month is Memorial Day, and it's a time that the nation pauses, and we always say we shouldn't just take one day to remember those who paid that ultimate sacrifice and never came home. As someone who's been in the service as long as you have, what does Memorial Day mean to you?
To me, I think back to our greatest generation, which we are, 10 years ago, we were slowly losing some of our greatest generation, our World War I and World War II vets. Now we are rapidly losing those people. So for me, I look back to those men and women that served, that really, in my mind, it was kind of a second foundation of our country. We had Revolutionary War, which is our primary foundation, but if you really look back to those men and women, what they sacrificed, during World War I and World War II, so that the world could kind of live, so to speak. That to me is the kind of second foundation of our country. Those are the people that I look to in terms of my grandparents who both served, in the Army. Those people were part of that greatest generation. I think we're starting to lose those. We're losing those discussions with that generation of grandparents, great grandparents for some. And I think what we need to do is we need to look at getting back to some of those roots, internally and externally as well.
What would you recommend to a young person, someone in high school, someone in college, about how to get back to those roots?
Ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions.
Yeah.
I find we do a lot of work in elementary schools as well, reading with kids and sitting and talking with kids. Those kids, they ask a million questions. They ask all the right questions.
Yeah.
They might be at odd times, and they might not sound so correct or politically correct, so to speak. But I think as you get into high school and in college a little more, people are a little more worried about asking certain questions about things. And I think service members a lot of times these days, they don't mind opening up and discussing, the things that they've done and the trials and tribulations they've gone through, whether they deployed one time, 3 times, or no times. Every service member has a story. Everyone has a story, so to speak, but every service member has some sort of story. And I'll bet people would find more often than not they're willing to share it.
Yeah, I remember when I was working in the Senate, and obviously in the Senate we deal with the Service Academy nominations.
Right.
And one of our pet peeves was always high school seniors who had their parents call and ask for the process.
Right.
And we're saying, if you want to serve, if you want to be an officer in the military, you need to learn how to make your own phone call.
Right.
I remember one day we received a phone call from a grandfather who had served himself and said, well, my grandson wants to serve and wants to join the military academy. And we said, well, you're going to need your grandson to call. We don't allow grandparents to call.
Right.
And he said, well, he's not allowed to. And we said, well, why not? He said, well, he's 7 and his parents won't let him use a phone. So he asked if I could call for him and find out what he needs to do so when he graduates high school, he can join the service academy.
Right.
to your point, it was because he had heard the stories from his grandfather,
Right.
and had instilled that heart and desire to serve.
Right.
And so at 7, he was calling and asking what he could do to join the service. If there is a lot, and I hear this a lot, I meet a lot of young men and women who want to join the military, and a lot of parents who are worried and they're nervous for the very reason we pause on Memorial Day.
Right.
There's concern that their kids don't come home. What do you say to parents who may be watching and just having that worry?
One of the things that makes my job interesting and also difficult is having that conversation. For me, it's one of those things that we discuss early on, that we, the Pennsylvania National Guard is here to facilitate protection of our state and country, in the state and across the world, so to speak. Our service members, I tell them from day one, and families early on, that within a 6-year enlistment contract, you can expect to deploy somewhere in the world. I'm not going to guarantee it, but that is the expectation, because we exist to protect the Commonwealth and the country. And if people don't feel that that's something that they can stomach and handle, then I ask them, that maybe this isn't right for them.
Sure.
And that's what we look for is people that understand that this is serious, this is a commitment. This isn't, you can't just walk off the fry line, so to speak. This is something that could change the country, the world, your community. There's a lot of things involved. There's a lot of variables involved with what we do, specifically with the Pennsylvania National Guard, because we're not just a deployment machine. We are in our communities. We are out there, during those terrible winter storms, transporting doctors and nurses to work and helping, local emergency management teams take care of business, so to speak. There's a lot more to being a soldier these days than it was when I enlisted in 1998.
Sure. Last question. If there's one thing that you could say about Memorial Day and about serving, especially for people like me who have never had the privilege of serving, what would that be?
Understand people's sacrifices and commitments that they've made, no matter how much, how little. Every person has a story, so to speak. So understand that people have gone before us, all of us, myself included, to ensure our safety and welfare over the course of time.
Yeah, that's great. Sgt Trevor, thank you for your time. I appreciate you joining us. Thank you for everything that you do. Come back soon?
Absolutely, anytime.
That'll be great. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Face the Issues. Again, my thanks to Sergeant First Class Andrew Treiber from the Pennsylvania Army National Guard for spending his time with us and talking to us about what it's like to serve today in 2019. As we close out the program, as you know, we usually take this third segment to talk to our guests a little bit more about something personal. But today we want to honor the courageous men and women who gave everything, paid the ultimate sacrifice so that we could be here today, so that we could have a show like this today. And so we'll close out the show now, wishing you a wonderful Memorial Day and reminding you to keep in your thoughts and your prayers those families, both of who have lost their loved ones and those who are still serving abroad. And we have a special tribute following here in their memory. So on behalf of all of us here at Face the Issues, my name is Sam Chen, thanking you for tuning in and inviting you to join us again next week. Thank you so much, and good night.